Anyone know what that is? That's music to my ears. That's another sale on Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Shopify makes it simple to sell to anyone from anywhere. Whether you're selling shirts or sandals, start selling with Shopify and join the platform simplifying commerce for millions of businesses worldwide. With Shopify, you'll customize your online store to your brand, discover new customers, and build relationships that will keep them coming back. Shopify covers all the sales channels to successfully grow your business, from an in-person POS system to an all-in-one e-commerce platform, even across social media platforms like TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. And thanks to 24/7 support and free on-demand business courses, Shopify is here to help you succeed every step of the way. It's how every minute new sellers around the world make their first sale with Shopify. And you can do it too. I love how Shopify makes it simple for anyone to sell their products anywhere. Whether they're ebooks or earrings, Shopify simplifies starting and running your own successful business. When you're ready to take your idea to the world, do it with Shopify, the commerce platform powering millions of businesses down the street and around the globe. Now it's your turn to try Shopify for free and start selling anywhere. So sign up for a free trial at shopify.com/C-Suite, all lowercase on C-Suite. Go to shopify.com/C-Suite, all lowercase on C-Suite to start selling online today. Shopify.com/C-Suite.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Authentic Achievements, where I have the absolute privilege of being joined by Helen Ashton, who founded Shape Beyond after nearly 30 years transforming complex businesses across manufacturing, business services, retail and financial services. Shape Beyond brings to life Helen's vision of a management consultancy relevant in today's fast-paced, rapidly changing environment. Helen's worked at the highest levels as an executive in PLC board level at CFO and COO roles and as the CEO in private equity portfolio companies. Helen's most recent roles have been Chief Executive Officer at GLA, a Cinven private equity-backed portfolio company, and Chief Financial Officer at ASOS.com, the global online fashion retailer. And Helen's currently interim non-exec director of JD Sports and Fashion. Helen, it's a joy to have you here. What an amazing, expansive career, doing so many of those different sectors. I can't wait to hear your journey. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. No, it's lovely to be here.
Thank you. So I don't even know where you start, but could you tell us a little bit about your journey so far, please?
Yeah. So I grew up in the Lake District. So I was the second of 4 children. My mum stayed at home. My dad was a self-employed architect. And so we're in the middle of the Lake District, absolutely beautiful place to grow up, but not very much going on. It was quite normal there for women to get married, sort of 18 or 19. If you were going to work, you'd probably work in sort of one of the cafes or one of the local shops. And it was really kind of the men's job to go out and work. And that's the home that I grew up with. And so I think when I went to school and I went to the local comp, I was kind of quite focused in my mind that actually I felt that this was a mold that I could potentially break away from. Not that there was any problem with that, and I know many people who stayed up in the Lake District and have absolutely loved it. And often I'm quite jealous when I go back up there of them living in such a beautiful place. But for me, I always felt that there was more out there. And, I was determined to prove that doing A-levels and going to university was something that was achievable, even though it was something in our family that had not really happened before. So I was very, very focused from a pretty young age, and I kind of went down the science routes. I did a chemistry degree, mainly because I really liked chemistry. Never wanted to go into chemistry at all, but loved chemistry. I went to Manchester, and the reason I picked Manchester was because it was quite close to home, so I could jump on the train and get home when I wanted to. But it was flipping heck, what a shock to the system after growing up in a sleepy town to all of a sudden being living in Moss Side and, meeting all of these, very diverse and, different individuals. And went on, did my chemistry degree, and then very quickly, like many people in their kind of early 20s, come out of university, don't really know what they want to do. So I decided accountancy seemed like quite a good thing at that time. I have learned now, actually, with I've got 5 children and 3 of them are kind of at university age. And I've worked out now that when you come out of university, it isn't accountancy everybody goes into. In fact, that is the last thing anyone would want to go into. But at my time, it was that. And I went and trained as an accountant, and then moved quite quickly into industry. And my starting point was in heavy manufacturing. And weirdly, I absolutely loved it. It was dirty, grimy, very male dominated. It didn't bother me. It was very northern, sleeves rolled up. And I loved the energy and the passion of it. And it was such a good training ground. So, loved working there, and then moved into different manufacturing jobs, British Aerospace, working with the Tornado jets. A lot of that, to be fair, was about going for lunch with the Top Gun pilots, but the accountants never got invited to the table with the pilots. So in my early career, I kind of moved through different finance roles in lots of different organizations. And I learned really quickly that finance tends to be finance. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. The challenges do tend to be quite similar. So, you can learn finance, but then for me, the really interesting bit was the cultures and the leaders and how things work in those worlds, which was fantastic for me. I moved across to work in Asda. So, and I would say if I look back in my whole career, that working in finance at Asda was probably the job that maybe I loved the most. Why is that? I think because I was super lucky to be working with really smart, young leaders, very family orientated. So probably the first organisation I'd been in where, the group CFO was the female. If you went to see her, quite often she had children in after school. At that point in time, I had 2 children. I was pregnant with my 3rd. And people looked at you as part of the team. They didn't look at you as a mom or a woman or an accountant. It was very much you were part of a wider team, and therefore you could get involved with anything and everything that you wanted to. And I really thrived in that environment. I loved it. I didn't feel judged in any shape or form. And actually, I think working there was the first time I saw really senior people doing really daft things. And you realise the power of, people not taking themselves too seriously and having a bit of a laugh and just generally enjoying what they were doing. And I loved it there. Got really fun memories. Yeah. Unfortunately, at that point in time, my husband was working down in Milton Keynes, and we had 3 children, and I was in Leeds with the children on my own. He was coming up at weekends, and he showed no sign of moving north. So he spotted a job for me one weekend and said, "Oh, here you go. This would be a great one." And it was in financial services. And I just remember at the time thinking, "Oh my God, of all the industries that I've ever worked in, financial services is not on my bucket list in any shape or form."
It is a unique industry.
And after coming from somewhere like Asda, where it's young and vibrant and, very family orientated, for me, that was quite a big shift. After saying that, I went to work in Barclaycard, which was a division of Barclays, and I've got to say it was pretty entrepreneurial. Again, some really strong leaders there. I joined at a time when Gary Hoffman was there, and then Anthony Jenkins arrived as well. So working with some really seasoned leaders, and I think I must have been really lucky. And I do look back in my career and think that there are just times when I have just been lucky that Anthony arrived in Barclaycard, and for him the big growth engine in the business was international.
Yeah,
and he must have seen something in me that he liked. Probably I was just like this stroppy northern sort of say it as it is kind of accountant, and he said, "Oh, let's move you across and you can be the CFO in the international division." And I was like, "Well, I've never done international before. This is a bit weird." So went across and did that, and within probably a few months, the managing director of that division left, and literally one morning I just got a call from Anthony to say, "Right, you're taking over as the managing director of international." So I went really quickly from never having done international, never having done anything but a finance job, to all of a sudden being the managing director of big businesses in Scandinavia, Southern South Africa, Southern Europe, Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, Middle East, US, and you'd be, just so different culturally, quite political agendas as well. And at the time, I think I was probably 32, maybe early 30s. And I think that was probably the only moment in my whole career where I've kind of sat there and gone, I just don't, I don't know what to do. And now I'm supposed to be managing all these businesses with people who know what they're doing. And I don't know. And now I'm leading a team of people who I used to be a peer of, and I don't really know what I need to do. And I remember early on saying to Anthony, "Well, what do you want me to do in this job? What do you need?" And he just said, "Helen, just hit the numbers, and I'll speak to you at the end of each month." And me going, "Oh my God." And it was, it was brilliant. It was a bit like, when you see little ducklings and the mother kind of pushes them into the lake. And that was me. I was like, oh my God. And then, very quickly, you just start to navigate your way through that, and you learn what works and what doesn't work. And I learned so much in that role about how different international businesses are, different cultures, just how to really use the opportunity to take on different personas, and to, really recognize the power of different cultures and not take it to heart. Because, for me, you'd go to South Africa and they would assume you were the PA. So, anybody in the meeting would ask you to go and pour the coffee. And I think, you can either get really sort of, hoity-toity about it, or you can get up and pour the coffee, sit down, and then start the meeting. I mean, it is, it's one of those things that I think, and I've always tended to try and just go with it. So a lot of my time there I really loved. The thing that maybe I didn't love when I was working in financial services was I did find it very male dominated. That didn't bother me too much because I think manufacturing, I was quite used to that. The bit that I did really struggle with was, I remember Anthony used to say to me, from a feedback perspective, he used to say, "I think you need to be less emotional about what you do." And I used to say to him, "I think you need to be more emotional about what you do." Because for me, constant restructuring and exiting people, and when you knew that 12 months' time you'd have to rehire people, hiring and firing, for me, I just preferred developing people. I just had a much more people focus. And I remember going home at the end of the day while I was there and looking at the mirror and thinking, I don't think I like what I'm becoming.
Yeah.
And I think that I found quite difficult. And I was at that kind of mid-30s. So you're still trying to sort of move up the ladder, and you kind of, over time, I think you probably don't realise that you eat into your boundaries, And over time, you actually get to the point where you lose what it was in the first place that you actually enjoyed about the job. So I worked in some different organisations in financial services, and then at the age of 40, I think I had a bit of a midlife crisis. I had my fifth child, so we'd had four girls, and then we had a boy finally, and I was literally going to be off on maternity for about 6 weeks, but he was actually really poorly. And I decided that I would take a whole 6 months of maternity leave and go crazy. And I did that. And while he was ill, I think that's the time that I kind of looked back at my job and thought, I thought I really loved it. I convinced myself I really loved it. But actually, when I was away from it, I didn't really miss it that much. And actually, there was a relief about being away from just the same old conversations. So I decided to do something that I'd always wanted to do, which was to think about going into doing a private equity job. And that's what I did. And I probably hadn't realised at that point in time, it's a bit like dating. You don't just go to the first private equity firm. They're all really different from a personality perspective. So therefore, picking which one you're going to work with really important. And I went and spoke to numerous, but I specifically liked a small private equity firm called Towbrook because they were just really decent and really nice, supportive people. And at the time, they had Jimmy Choo. And I absolutely, when you're like a dream job, Jimmy Choo for me would be a dream job. But they were just selling it. And they said, but don't worry, we've got another opportunity for you. And I was like, well, what is it? They're like, it's financial services. And I was like, oh, well, what's that then? And it was a business that bought portfolios of debt from banks and then collected them.
Okay.
And it was one of those that it was like, okay, well, I'm not really sure about it, but yeah, I'll give it a go. And went in and again found it a really intriguing organisation in terms of at that point in time, those businesses were becoming regulated. They were unregulated, but becoming regulated. So we ended up going through a really large transformational piece of work, really taking that business into just much more customer centric, much more focused around affordability and all sorts of different things around that. So it was a real cultural shift. The business had about 500 people, so it was quite small. You could know everybody. You knew their families. You knew everything about them, and they knew everything about you. And it was kind of like having another child. Like the business was, it really felt like almost like your own business. And I loved it. I absolutely adored it. And I think what you realise is it doesn't really matter what the industry is. You have to find something that in you recognise it as being worthwhile work. Yeah. And you kind of think, well, in a business that buys debt off banks and collects it, how can that be worthwhile work? And we used to go and sit and take phone calls, and you would have a phone call off somebody who was literally about to commit suicide. So they've got so much debt, they don't know what to do. And they're ringing up and they want help. And you would sit next to, some of the team who'd be speaking to them, and they were just so amazing with people and so, supportive and mindful and, not, you have this mind, you have in mind these bailiffs banging on doors and everything. And actually, yes, there's always some people who don't pay back debt, but the majority of people end up in that situation because, for many different reasons, but not because they don't want to repay, they'd love to. And I think being able to interact with people and actually when they put down the phone for them to think, I feel better now than I did when I picked up the phone. I found that really worthwhile work, and training and helping people to get to that point. I loved it. So when we sold the business, I found it really hard. It was like selling a child. And I think when you're in private equity, it's all about the money. And for me, it was more around how do we find the right home for that business? How does it carry on and go, continue to grow? What about the people who worked in that business? How do we make sure that they land in the right way? And we were, we were incredibly lucky with the buyer that bought that business. So for me, out of that, the thing that drove me was much less about money and much more around doing something that for me felt really worthwhile and taking it on to the next level. And then at that point, when I finished there, I again did something really crazy. An opportunity came up to go and work at ASOS. It had been having a really tough time. They'd had warehouses burned down. Share price was almost at an all-time low, in the market. It was kind of not in a great place. And I remember the headhunter saying to me, this, you could go into here, this could be a real positive or it could just be dreadful. And I was like, oh no, I'm up for the challenge. And always wanted to work in fashion and digital and technology. So yeah, it was my first listed role. And over the 3 years I was there, the business grew, really, really massively, up to about, I think we got to about 6 billion market cap. Share price was up about 5 times. The big thing the things that I really remember from there are learning a lot about digital and technology and customer. ASOS they talk about the customer all of the time, and I love that. Many other businesses talk about the customer, but not to the same extent. But the other thing that was really interesting there was after working in banking, where the average age was about like 45, there the average age was like early 20s. So all of a sudden you were working with much younger teams. And at first I thought it was the ASOS culture, but then you realised it was the sort of millennial Gen Z culture. And oh my goodness, have the generations got the ability to coach and develop us as leaders? Because I learned more from those teams than any team I've ever worked with before. And I had some really, really strong people coming up through the finance team, particularly women, actually. I remember saying to one once, you could have my job at some point. I said, you don't believe in yourself. I believe in you more than you believe in yourself, but you could have my job if you wanted to. And I remember her turning around to me and saying, why on earth would I want your job? Like, you never go home. You're like, you've got no time to yourself. I don't see that as success. I don't want your job. And at the end of the day, when you go home and you think, I've worked like 25 years to get to this point, and somebody's just told me that like they would never have my job given. And I think, for me, it was really interesting, I think, to have that very different context of what success looks like. And I think for me, that was really interesting to work with those very different teams with generationally very different challenges as well. Very intriguing. And then sort of at the end of that period of time, I had a health scare out of nowhere. I was fine, but having some back problems, literally went to a consultant. And within a couple of days, I was in hospital having a pretty major operation, out of action for 6 weeks, couldn't drive. And I think that probably was a really defining career moment for me, where I think, again, you step back and you think, I was like 47 or something. And you kind of think, well, I'll go on forever. I've never done any exercise. I don't eat properly. I don't look after myself. I'm kind of there for the kids, but I kind of don't listen to them. It goes over my head. And then all of a sudden you realise, actually, you've been giving all of this attention to work, but actually health and family, you've been neglecting. And that caught up on me. Yeah. And I was very lucky to come out the other side of that in a positive way. Other people that I was with at the time didn't. So I think you learn the hard way to really think about what's important. And it was at that period of my time of life really that and then I stepped back and thought, okay, now I need to think about doing something different. And this 24/7 exec stuff, I've proved to myself I can get there. I've proved I can sit on PLC boards. I've proved everything that I needed to prove to myself as a teenager. But actually, there's way more to life than anything that I've done, and that's really the pivotal moment that got me to step back and really look at what the next 10 to 15 years of my working career was going to be, and it wasn't going to continue in the way it had.
I think sometimes life has a way of stepping in and giving you a moment of pause, doesn't it? Of saying you can't keep doing this. Like if you do this, it comes at a cost. It comes at a consequence. And I think sometimes when we're in it and it just becomes part of the day to day, doesn't it? You don't blink twice at kind of working every hour God sends, or the fact that people ring you at 3 a.m. and go, "You've answered." It's like you rang. That's what you expect in these kind of jobs. They expect you to be on all of the time, and then all of a sudden life will give you a moment to say, you've got to take a moment, and you've got to pause and reflect, and you've got to make conscious choice now about which direction that you want to go in. And I think it sounds like you're given that moment of pause, and fortunately given the opportunity to come out the other side of that moment of pause and take stock and reflect and recreate where you wanted to move to. But what an amazing journey, and to do it with 5 children. I mean, my hat goes off to you. I've got 1. And I kind of, balancing the whole, making sure that you're doing what she needs, and also doing what work needs doing. And you've talked about some of the industries that I know really well, so I completely get the challenges and opportunities that they bring. What I love about your story is that you've also proved that skill sets are transferable. I think we've lived under a misconception that actually what we do is industry specific, and yet one of the things that I've seen in my career is when it boils down to it, it all boils down to people. Wherever we are, whatever we do, customers are people, suppliers are people, companies are people, shareholders are people, colleagues are people. If we get good at people, and that shone through your story, we get good at people and the rest becomes easy, and therefore it doesn't matter what industry we're in, because people are people. So I love that kind of that just flowed so lovely through the story, that you were very good at swapping judgment for curiosity, learning from the people around you as much as teaching the people around you, so that together you grew.
Yeah, I think, what I would say is I wouldn't say that I'm brilliant at doing it. I think that some things I've done well. I think some things I've done really badly. And, you try and learn from that. I'm quite introverted. I'm kind of slightly autistic as well. So I'm very structured. I'm very focused. I don't mean to come across like that, but that just is how I am. And I think being a female as well, I think it's really interesting that people put different perspectives, that if I was like that and I was a man, they would say I was focused. But, if I'm like that, I'm sort of cold or clinical or whatever. And I don't see it like that. But I think, again, as I've got older, what I've found is that every individual is a real individual, and I act in the way I act because of the way I am. I've got a daughter that's got autism. I've got a daughter that has ADHD, and everybody has something that makes them amazing. Yeah. And my daughters, I wouldn't have them any other way. They are very different and they excel at different things. But I think it's really interesting that when you work in organizations, there's a lot of training there for commercial skills or using Excel spreadsheets or whatever, but actually skills around how to engage with people to actually understand what works for them, and how do you get the best out of them, and how do you put that time aside to listen to people. And I think, many times as a female, you end up in an organisation where anybody who doesn't want to have a difficult conversation will divert people to come and speak to you as a female. And there's the piece for me around how do we get people to be less worried about having, and these are tricky conversations, around people, with anorexia stealing food from bins, or people in the menopause, or, I had numerous miscarriages while I was working and I didn't feel I could tell people. But these are all like just human things, aren't they? They're not, they're everyday human things that are happening all of the time. And yet so many people, if you, the way to put fear of God through people at work is to say you've got like a woman's problem, and then all of a sudden you'll see people scatter. Nobody. It's the quickest way to close a conversation.
I think it's one of those ones where, and maybe this is like old school leadership. As old school leaders, we were supposed to know all of the answers. We were supposed to have the answer to everything. Yes. And problems like that, there's no answer to. You can't solve it for somebody. Like you, I've had a miscarriage. You can't solve that for somebody. No. All you can do is hold the space for them to tell you how they feel, to let it out, to share, to be with them in that uncomfortable silence while they find their way through. And I think that's the bit that people have found really difficult, is that how do I go in and do something where I don't know the answer and I can't solve it? So actually I'm just going to have to sit in uncomfortable spaces and just hold the space. And I think if we taught people more around that, if we taught them that it's okay to sit there with somebody in an uncomfortable space and hold it for them, because actually that's an act of kindness, to listen, to understand, not to shut the problem down and sweep it away and hope that that you can make them skip out cheerfully. We're not going to make people skip out cheerfully all the time, but it's why it always fascinates me. We call them soft skills, and yet people find them so hard. So why could we not do a little bit more on how do we help people get comfortable in the uncomfortable? Because when we get comfortable there, it's amazing.
And for me, you're absolutely spot on right. The leaders of today, it's much more this, servant leadership. You're there to help to allocate resources and enable people to get on and do what they need to do. And the way you do that is by understanding and listening. And, the people who are doing the job will always have the answers if you actually ask them and listen to them. Yeah. Now, there've been plenty of times where I've made an assumption about somebody. And had I taken the time to step back and go, why are you thinking like that? Or why? And they would have told you. But I think, again, it's this task-focused leadership, old-fashioned mentality of I've got 20 things and I need to tick them off. I'll get around to the people things tomorrow. And you kind of think that kind of approach is long gone. But in many of the organisations I work in, it's still very prevalent. This idea of presenteeism, this idea of you need to do all of this, you need to work faster, and all of this other stuff that's going on around great resignations and purpose and people wanting to feel linked with businesses. I don't know, I think people have got their head in the sands, and they're kind of hoping it's going to go back to how it was, and it isn't. And I think if I look back at my career, actually, where I've spent time with people, coaching them, developing them, seeing them progress, if I were to look back at my career and think, what are the things I'm the most proud of? It would be those things where you've seen people that have got more and more successful, and you think, oh my God, I had a bit, I had something to do with that. And I think that's, if I could go back and change something, I would go back and really think about spending less time on task and more time understanding and supporting and helping people. Yeah. And, I wouldn't say that I was bad at it, but I think I could have been better. If somebody had actually stepped me down and said, I could have been better. And somebody once said to me a phrase, there's some phrases that stick in your mind. Somebody once said to me, Helen, instead of trying to outwork somebody, try and outthink them. And I think it's really good. I think people are so in the moment of just doing stuff that there's this moment of just going, okay, like, let's not move the chess piece quickly. Let's actually think and let's choose and be more thoughtful about what we're trying to do here. And actually, it's a bit like with your health or your family. You neglect the people who work for you and you go, oh, I'll do that one-to-one tomorrow, I'm too busy today, or I'll do it the next day. And every time you do that, there's a little bit of a chink that happens in that relationship because that person has been waiting for that session. It could have been that they were going to talk to you about something really important and you've just binned it off. And you think, oh, it's fine. But actually, those kind of things, I think over the years, you realise how much those interactions really matter. And you put them first in the priority list is so important.
That's so true. I mean, I remember somebody saying to me many years ago, and it's kind of stuck, which is, people see what's important to you by where you choose to spend your time. And for a long period, like you, I didn't see it was choice because because I've got this list of things and I need to tick them off because that's what we're being measured on, until I realised that actually I'm choosing to make that my priority, and I could choose to do something different instead. And actually, similarly, probably to you kind of the latter years, I was much better at the being present, being in the moment, listening to people, helping develop them. And one of the things I loved in your story was when you shared about one of the ladies that worked for you, and you said that she could do your job. I appreciate she didn't want it, but almost that piece of saying actually what you were able to do was give her belief. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts that we can give somebody, is to give them our belief in them, so until they can find their own belief. Because sometimes we see that potential in people, don't we? We can see that it's like, if you just trust yourself, you could do anything, whatever you want, even if you don't want what it is I can see for you, but trust that you can be the best that you can be. So if you had to give us one last bit, I could chat to you all day, I'm very conscious of your time. If you had to give us just one final pearl of wisdom, what would it be?
It's hard to pick one. I think that it's so, I think with hindsight, I think that you've got to be really clear on what you think success is. And it isn't necessarily what you would come, it wouldn't be the immediate thing that you would just answer.
Yeah.
So for me, it would have been always very much, I want to be a FTSE PLC, or I want to be on a board, or I want to blah, blah, blah. And for many years, that would have immediately come out.
Yeah.
And then as you hear with many people, they achieve those things. And then they go, oh, well, I don't feel any better, actually. I probably feel a bit worse now because I'm not sure what that next thing is. And I think, I was 50 a couple of weeks ago. And I think, when you look back on your life and you go 50 years, and there's loads of things that, I can look at and go, yeah, they were all great. But actually, how many of them made me smile? How many of them made me happy? Probably not that many of them. And I think now when I speak to the children, I feel there's an opportunity for them not to make those same mistakes. And therefore, when they're saying, I want to go and do this at university, or, I want to be a lawyer or whatever, for me, then I go, well, why? Do you even know what a lawyer does? And actually, you are so beautifully creative. Why? Why? Just help me to understand. Because if you think that that's what success looks like, or that's what we want you to do, then for God's sake, don't do it. You're young. Go and set up a business. Go and do some of the things that are crazy. It doesn't matter. But, with the best will in the world, life is short. And therefore, spend time understanding what it is that really makes you happy, and really focus on that. And if it's not making you happy, just make a change, because it won't get any better. It's like you will either feel that you fit with something or you don't. And whenever my values have been out of sync with something, generally it really sucks on your energy, and you've just got to get out and do something that makes you happy.
Oh, I love that, Helen. Such great advice. Yeah, I think we're all here to do what makes our soul sing, aren't we? And it reminds me of Pablo Picasso's quote, which is, the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. So find the thing that makes your soul sing and then share it widely with the world. Helen, it's been an absolute privilege. I hope you will come back again and we can have another conversation. But in the interim, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, they can get in touch with me via LinkedIn, or certainly via our Shape Beyond website as well. They can come via that route. So I'm relatively easy to get hold of.
Perfect. I will make sure all of the links are in the show notes. Helen, it's been an absolute joy. Until next time, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.